Today, women only represent 9% of the British Armed Forces. Although the British Armed Forces allow women to join, there's currently a ban on women serving frontline infantry roles. Headlines all over the UK are sending similar messages, reading, "Will British Army allow women to serve combat roles?" And "Women soldiers could be allowed to fight on the front line with the British Army." It is true that the United Kingdom Defense Secretary has a lot of important decisions to make in 2015. It is also true that in 1915, a British woman had already broken the same barriers that are being disputed today. A British woman had served in the frontline infantry. She had experienced war in the most raw of environments. Flora Sandes had given up everything to fight for Serbia. Her story proves that camaraderie outweighs gender differences, and that despite of all the disadvantages, women were not only able to fight in the First World War, but they were able to lead. In Flora Sandes' book, The Autobiography of a Woman Soldier, a brief record of adventure with the Serbian army, she does not spend a lot of time distinguishing herself from the men. Rather, she submerges herself into the culture of war. Sandes determined that she was not a woman fighting in the war, but she was simply a soldier. She writes, "I had long realized that if you have the misfortune to be born a woman, it is better to make the best of a bad job and not try to be a bad imitation of a man. I was suddenly pitchforked into the Serbian army and for 7 years lived practically a man's life." The men had already been accustomed to women fighting with them in the army, for a handful of Serbian peasant girls had chosen to fight for Serbia when the war broke out. Sandes found herself immediately respected among the ranks. She explained, "The only thing that distinguished me particularly and made them treat me with so much affection and respect was the fact that I, an Englishwoman, was willing to rough it with them and to fight for Serbia. It was one thing to fight and die for your own country, but to fight and die for another was particularly honorable, according to the men of the Serbian army, and especially if one came from a respected country, such as England." Camaraderie was a defining force in the survival of the soldiers fighting in the Balkans. The bonds that the soldiers made in the mountains was one that could never be forgotten. The bonds that were forged between the soldiers was more important than where a particular man came from, what he did in the past, or even if one was a man or a woman. Camaraderie was more important than the fact that Sandes was a woman. It was seldom even discussed, and when it was rarely in a negative way. Sandes made friends with almost everyone. Those who stuck by her side were loyal and often put their own comfort, interests, and even their lives aside in order to assist Sandes. Many men gave up many comforts in order to relieve Sandes of any troubles. Her comrades sacrificed their rations if she was hungry, their cigarettes if she was hurt, and their horses if it was dark and there was a long, treacherous hike. Sandes asked for none of this and often refused their offers, but these acts of kindness show how little gender mattered and how much Sandes was revered and respected among the ranks. Once, Sandes had been critically injured while passing through a clearing with her company. A bomb had ricocheted off her revolver, barely leaving her with her life. When some of her comrades noticed the incident, they rushed back to rescue her mangled body, even with the threat of Bulgarians on their heels. Sandes recounts the incident. "Much more than their lives they were risking for me, for no one knew better than they their fate if the Bulgars got them. And even when I said it was no use at all getting taken on my account, they stoutly swore that they were not going unless they could take me with them." They had saved her with no regard for the consequences. It is true that without those men by her side, she would not have made it out of the mountains. While she was injured, Sandes was transferred to a hospital outside of enemy territory. It was there that the doctor operating on her taught her a valuable lesson. Sandes describes the incident. He knew better than to sympathize with an overwrought patient, so he lit a cigarette, thrust it between my lips, and told me to shut up and remember I was a soldier, which had far more effect than any amount of petting would have done. The doctor did not treat her as a wounded woman in need of comforting. Rather, she was treated as a brave and strong soldier who was injured on the front lines. Once again, the fact that Sandes was a woman was not even noticed. She was treated equally and with respect. Sandes fought long and hard and eventually began to wedge her way into the hierarchy of the Serbian army. After the Bulgarian armistice, many leaders, Sandes included, had been long awaiting promotions. Many of Sandes' comrades had indeed been promoted, while she had been passed over. According to Sandes, there had never been a woman officer in the Serbian army. The contingency had never arisen. Consequently, there was no provision made for or against it. There was no law against women becoming officers. Rather, Sandes had been the first and only occasion in Serbian history, and no law had previously been constructed. Sandes' argument for why she was suited for promotion read, "Either I was a soldier or was not. If I was, why had a distinction been made? If not, then why not demobilize me and let me go home?" Of course, she was not demobilized, and after a special act of parliament had been passed, Flora Sandes became the first woman officer in the Serbian army. Sandes was an incredible woman and an incredible soldier. Her experience while fighting in the Great War was one that she loved and the best of her life. She fought among brothers and felt displaced once the war was over. After the fighting was complete, the camaraderie was never the same. But in the mountains, while guns were firing and artillery showering the backs of her and her brothers, she knew she belonged there. Sandes shows an extraordinary side of fighting, one filled with camaraderie, trust, and exhilaration unique to that of wartime. The story of Flora Sandes is not one free of struggle or oppression, but it is one that shows just how powerful of an influence women can have in a profession dominated by men. She exemplifies just how women can persevere and lead among the soldiers of the First World War.